Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Melissa had picked that bistro with deliberate precision. It wasn't just any place, it carried deep meaning for Patrick: birthdays, celebrations, small victories they'd toasted together. For her, the setting was perfect for what she had planned: a clean break, no room for going back. Patrick arrived expecting a regular dinner, maybe even a gesture of reconciliation, since their relationship had been falling apart over the past few months. But from the moment they sat down, her expression showed no warmth at all. Her eyes, fixed on him, held a nearly cold determination, as if every word had been rehearsed for days. Without any preamble, Melissa said she'd met Carter Hughes, a man full of life, someone who could keep up with what she truly wanted for the future. Her tone was confident, almost proud, and Patrick realized she wasn't talking about a fling. This was a permanent replacement. Before he could react, Melissa started describing how Carter had planned everything: first-class tickets already booked, a hotel with a view of the Eiffel Tower, a reservation at an exclusive restaurant, and sightseeing around the City of Light like a movie script. Each detail came with the excitement of someone about to live an adventure with no turning back. Patrick stayed still, but inside, each sentence set off an alarm. The name Carter wasn't just familiar, he'd come across that last name in reports and supplier lists at work. Carter Hughes wasn't a stranger to Patrick's professional world, he was tied to businesses dealing with serious money. The coincidence that Melissa's new great love was someone with that exact connection didn't feel like chance. That trip, described with so much enthusiasm, suddenly took on a whole new meaning for Patrick. As Melissa talked, he paid attention to details that would probably go unnoticed by anyone else. The way she avoided using past tense verbs when talking about them, as if life with him was something long dead. The sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned Carter, a kind of excitement she hadn't shown him in years. The lack of hesitation in her words: she wasn't trying to soften the blow, ease into it, or ask for understanding. She was simply announcing a decision that, for her, was already final. Patrick didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't even show he was shaken. He let her fill every silence with her story, because he knew each piece of information was valuable. The more Melissa spoke, the clearer it became that something deeper was behind this sudden life change. It wasn't just about passion or marital dissatisfaction. There was a financial, maybe even ethical, layer to this. Carter wasn't just a new man in his wife's life. He was part of a much bigger picture, and Patrick was starting to see its outline. Melissa kept going, describing how Paris would be the fresh start she'd always wanted. She talked about finally feeling understood, having someone by her side who wasn't afraid to take risks to live fully. Patrick took it all in silently, and with each sentence, he formed a sharper picture, not just of Carter, but of the intentions behind that trip. The table, once a space of intimacy, was now the stage for a breakup designed to hurt and impress. And still, Patrick kept his composure, as if untouched, but inside, something was already moving, calculating every next step. When Patrick left the bistro that night, the conversation with Melissa echoed like an open wound. She had been clear: she was with someone else, and life with him no longer made sense to her. She didn't ask for time, didn't leave room for discussion, she simply declared the end, like closing a contract with no renewal clause. She said she'd come back to the apartment just to pick up a few things before the trip, then move on with Carter. It was direct and painfully straightforward, with not a single gesture showing regret or hesitation. In the car, the drive home felt longer than ever, not because of traffic, but because of the storm of thoughts crashing into each other. Every memory of them, every moment he believed their marriage could still be saved, now felt like a painful illusion. Scenes mixed together: her smile in better times, and the cold stare he'd seen that night. Melissa hadn't asked for a conversation, hadn't looked for understanding. She'd delivered a verdict and moved on, like someone drawing a line and refusing to look back. When he opened the apartment door, a heavy silence surrounded him. The lights were off, the air still. Her clothes were still in the closet, perfumes on the bathroom shelf, couple photos on the bookshelf. Everything in place, and yet already carrying the weight of something about to be emptied. He knew that soon, those things would disappear, and the life they knew would be just a closed chapter. Patrick allowed himself a few seconds to feel the impact, but no more than that. The emotional wound was raw, but something stronger was rising beneath it, the need to understand. He remembered every word Melissa had said about the trip, every luxury detail, every promise of an exclusive experience. And along with that, the uncomfortable memory: Carter wasn't an unfamiliar name. Patrick had seen it before, linked to internal company documents. He went to his office and turned on the computer. His fingers typed with precision, guided more by instinct than conscious thought. Within seconds, he found Carter's company listed as a vendor. The history showed active contracts, recent payments, and a significant flow of expenses. But it was in the corporate travel and expense records that the truth began to clearly emerge. The screen displayed first-class tickets issued for Carter, destination Paris, with Melissa listed as a companion. Below that, reservations at a high-end hotel, dinners at famous restaurants, even tickets to private events. All booked using a corporate card, recorded as business expenses. There was no other way to interpret it. This was blatant misuse. The blow to his chest was twofold. It wasn't enough that he'd been emotionally betrayed, now he also knew the woman he'd devoted years of his life to was about to live in luxury funded by money that didn't belong to her or Carter. It was as if the betrayal had invaded not just his home, but his professional world, the space where he'd always maintained control and respect. Patrick took a deep breath and started documenting everything. Screenshots, saved PDFs, copies of reservation codes, dates and times. Each file was a piece of a puzzle that would soon be impossible to deny. He wasn't in a rush. Each saved file was another brick in the foundation of something much bigger than jealousy or revenge. As he worked, images flashed through his mind: Melissa at the bistro, talking about Carter like a prize, Carter using corporate resources to impress. It was impossible not to feel the contrast between the man who'd always played fair and the one who seemed to ignore the rules. That contrast, more than anger, fueled a quiet determination. When he finished gathering the information, Patrick leaned back in his chair. The pain of the breakup was still there, but now mixed with a clarity that felt almost surgical. Melissa had chosen her path, and so had Carter. What they hadn't foreseen was that their choices came with a cost, and Patrick was ready to present it at the right moment. Patrick stayed seated in front of the computer, staring at the newly created folder like someone looking at a loaded weapon. The evidence was there, organized, undeniable. But having proof was only the beginning. He knew that to turn this into a decisive blow, he had to time it perfectly: the moment, the method, the exact sequence of steps. Any hasty move could give Carter and Melissa a chance to craft a defense, and Patrick wasn't willing to take that risk. His first step was to review every document to make sure there were no gaps. He checked flight confirmation numbers, verified issue dates, and compared them with corporate travel reports. He compared the amount spent against the company's usual expense patterns and made notes clearly showing misuse. Everything was recorded with the coldness of an experienced auditor, even though what drove him was far more personal than any rulebook. Next, he opened his corporate email and started drafting messages to the finance department and HR. The text left no room for ambiguity. It listed the facts, attached the evidence, and explained how each transaction fit a pattern of improper use. He avoided adjectives or direct accusations against Carter, preferring to let the numbers speak for themselves. The goal was simple: make it clear this wasn't a personal conflict, but a serious violation of company policy. As he wrote, Patrick already pictured the reaction when the directors read it. He knew that, faced with such clear proof, the response would be immediate. But the most strategic part was yet to come: scheduling the exact moment to send the emails. If he sent them before the trip, Carter would have time to cancel or change plans. The real impact would come the moment they were in the air, unable to act. He opened the calendar and marked the approximate takeoff time of the flight Melissa had mentioned at dinner. He scheduled the emails to be automatically sent a few minutes after departure. That would ensure that when Carter tried to use any company resource to check into the hotel or pay a bill in Paris, he'd be met with blocks and declined transactions. Patrick wanted the discovery to hit abruptly, right at the peak of their confidence. In addition, he accessed the vendor management system and prepared the formal request to immediately suspend Carter's company account. The procedure required detailed justification and internal approval, but with the evidence attached, he knew validation would be nearly automatic. In the same request, he flagged the corporate card used in the transactions for blocking and the pending reservations for freezing. Patrick also prepared a separate report, aimed only at the executive board. In it, he highlighted the reputational and financial risks of maintaining ties with a vendor using company resources for personal gain. He made it clear that if this became public through external channels, it could damage the corporation's image. This wasn't just precaution, it was assurance that as soon as the board read it, there would be no hesitation in cutting all ties. With everything ready, he did one final review. It was nearly impossible for anything to go wrong. The gears were in place, and all that remained was to wait. Patrick didn't feel rushed. On the contrary, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that every passing minute brought him closer to the exact moment when Melissa and Carter would realize their fairy tale was built on shaky ground. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. There was no room for regret. This wasn't just settling a personal score, it was delivering a justice that merged the personal with the professional. Carter had crossed a line, and Melissa had chosen to align herself with him. Patrick, in turn, had chosen the path of precision, where every action was planned so the impact would be final. When he opened his eyes, the computer screen showed the countdown timer for the email delivery. The digital hand moved slowly, as if testing his patience. But Patrick knew that at the right moment, all the work of that night would become the beginning of something that would completely change the course of that story. The day after the bistro dinner, Patrick woke up with fragments of the previous night still swirling in his head, but there was no room for hesitation. He called his lawyer early and scheduled an urgent meeting. Sitting across from him, he explained what had happened, described Melissa's decision, and stated he wanted the divorce process started immediately. His tone was firm, almost clinical. There was no plea for reconciliation, no space for emotional debate, just a clear desire to legally end something that, in practice, was already over. The lawyer took down every detail, asked objective questions, and assured him the process would be formalized within hours. Patrick left feeling he'd laid the first stone of a new path. 2 days before the trip, Melissa showed up at the apartment. The visit was brief and impersonal. She walked in, grabbed some clothes, documents, and personal items she considered essential. She avoided any conversation that might rekindle memories or spark discussion. Patrick watched from a distance, noticing how this figure, once so meaningful, now moved like a stranger in a hurry not to miss an appointment. When she left, she took only what fit in a medium-sized suitcase, leaving behind the rest of the life they'd built. To him, the scene was definitive. There was no going back, not even an interest in leaving a final word to close the story with dignity. 2 days passed, and with her bags already on their way to the airport, Patrick knew the moment he'd been waiting for was near. The scheduled email delivery time was the centerpiece of his plan. On the other side of the Atlantic, Melissa and Carter were already on the plane, likely smiling at each other, certain the coming days would be filled with luxury and exclusivity. What they didn't realize was that before the plane even landed, the ground beneath them would start to give way. As soon as the system sent the emails, the entire structure Patrick had built sprang into motion. The finance department was alerted about the misuse, HR received the formal complaint, and Carter's vendor account was suspended. Within minutes, the corporate card used to fund the trip stopped working, and reservations tied to that payment began to be cancelled one after another, like dominoes falling in perfect line. When the plane landed in Paris, the damage was already done. Melissa and Carter stepped off confidently, unaware that the first obstacle would appear right on the way to the hotel. When they tried to pay for the taxi, Carter handed over the card and got a short, blunt reply: "Transaction declined." He tried again, as if it were just a temporary glitch. The decline repeated. The second attempt happened at the hotel desk. The receptionist, polite but firm, informed them that the reservation had been cancelled due to payment failure and the room had already been given to another guest. Carter tried to argue, but was told that without a valid new payment method, there was no way to fix it. Melissa, standing beside him, felt the embarrassment grow as she noticed other guests watching the scene. Carter then called the card provider and heard the confirmation Patrick had already predicted: the account was blocked due to improper use of corporate funds. The word sounded like an irrefutable verdict. Melissa fell silent, slowly absorbing the reality that the fairy tale had ended before it even began. Back at his apartment, Patrick saw the phone ring. It was Melissa. He answered without rushing, listening to her frantic accusations and questions. She wanted to know if he was behind this. Patrick, calm-voiced, simply said that every consequence was the result of the choices she and Carter had made. Before she could say more, he ended the call, leaving her with the weight of silence. He knew from that point on, nothing more needed to be done. The plan was in motion, and the consequences would follow their own path. Carter would have to answer to the company, Melissa would have to face the man she'd traded her marriage for, now exposed as someone who couldn't deliver on his promises. And Patrick, from a distance, simply watched the collapse he'd orchestrated with precision. The hours following the disaster in Paris spread like shockwaves. Patrick didn't need to seek news, it reached him through ignored calls, unread messages, and indirect reports from coworkers already talking about Carter's sudden, humiliating downfall. The story started circulating through the office like a poorly kept secret. Everyone wanted to know how a consultant, once respected, had been severed so abruptly. The finance department acted fast. Within 24 hours, they began the formal process to recover the misused funds, sending notices to Carter's company demanding immediate repayment. The legal team also stepped in, preparing a dossier for potential arbitration. Carter, cornered, began to feel the weight not just of losing the trip, but of the real risk of his career collapsing. Melissa, meanwhile, returned to the country without the glow she'd left with. The suitcases that once carried excitement now held wrinkled clothes and embarrassing memories. Her relationship with Carter lost any trace of romance during those days. Arguments started in Paris, with mutual blame over who should have seen it coming, and intensified on the flight back. By the time they landed, they parted ways like strangers who'd shared a disaster. In Patrick's apartment, the silence was different now. Not empty or uncomfortable, but one of order and control. He followed the developments from a distance, but didn't get involved. He knew each consequence was falling into place without his direct intervention. His lawyer kept him updated on the divorce, which was moving quickly. Melissa's lack of opposition sped things up, as if even she acknowledged there was nothing left to argue. The company's executive board sent Patrick a formal thank you for the way he'd handled the report. They acknowledged that without his initiative, the misuse of funds might have gone unnoticed much longer. Though the message was standard protocol, to him it carried personal meaning, confirmation that he'd acted with integrity, even when emotion could have taken over. Months passed, and the marks of the incident remained visible for everyone involved. Carter lost major contracts, saw his name circulated internally in the industry as a cautionary tale. His network shrank, opportunities dried up. Melissa, without her previous financial stability and with her reputation damaged, moved back in with her parents. Her social media, once filled with travel and events, became quiet, almost invisible. Patrick, on the other hand, found a new rhythm. He stayed in the same apartment, but now with a different sense of lightness. He took better care of himself, resumed activities he'd set aside, and allowed himself to make new plans without rushing. Among those plans was the decision to return to the same bistro where it had all begun. When he finally went back, it wasn't out of nostalgia, but to mark a personal turning point. He ordered the same dish from that night, not as a bitter memory, but as a symbol that the chapter was closed. While waiting, he thought about the irony of how some flights, no matter how promising, end before they even reach their destination. He finished the meal, paid the bill, and walked out without looking back, certain that the real victory wasn't in Melissa and Carter's downfall, but in the complete control he'd maintained over his own path. Patrick didn't need applause or public recognition. What he'd gained through this process was invisible to outsiders, but immense to him, the peace of knowing he hadn't reacted impulsively, that he'd used intelligence as his main weapon, and that in the end, life moved forward with him in control of every step. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.